Welcome everyone. And should I say habari za asubuhi, bonjour, good morning. As Ruby said, we are using the chat, so please enter your morning greetings in your local language there so that we can know how to greet you. But very much welcome and thank you for joining us. We are happy that you could join us. You will be pleased to know that in this forum, we have representations from different countries, especially in East Africa. This is a session titled Sustainable Open Access to Book Publishing in East Africa. So specifically for East Africans, we have participants and speakers from countries like Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, people from South Africa. I see France and speakers also from the UK and the Netherlands. So we are a full house today, and we are a very rich group. I think I must say also that the participants here, just for your view, that they represent different organizations, around more than 20 organizations, so to say, from publishing, academic libraries, funders, non-profit organizations, government and non-government organizations. So we will not be lacking in terms of conversation. I also need to mention that this session is co-organized by the Directory of Open Access Books, OAPEN, Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association, that is OASPA, the French Institute for Research in Africa, IFRA, which is also part of the CNRS. And you will, as we go along, you will encounter speakers and moderators from this organization. So if you're interested in any part of these organizations or knowing how they work, you can contact the people in this forum. Before we get started, please recall what Ruby has said about our mode of interaction and refer to the OASPA agreement. This is a two-part session. And our goal today, just a brief rehash of what we have been communicating with you. We are aware that the open science community has made major strides in advancing open science and especially open access. But this, in a long time, this has had a focus on journals. And recently, there's a rapid growth for open access book publishing, thanks to a well-intentional global community. And we also are aware that you as publishers, I am specifically talking about publishers because you are key drivers to this growth, but you have contextualized experiences based on your geographical locations, funding models, and your disciplines, and even your research policies in your countries. And for this reason, we would like to understand how especially East Africa is faring on in terms of open access publishing for books, what is needed to make us as a community, a scholarship community, more visible, and so many other questions that we will be able to answer today. So this is the reason for this session. In the first part of this webinar, we will hear from different speakers, about 4 of them, and we will allow them to speak for about 10 minutes. This is a non-interactive session. After that, we will have a second session where we will get into more discussions. There's a last-minute change in the program. Professor Wafula will not be speaking. He was unable to join the first part, but he will probably join the second part and make some few remarks. The second part will be moderated by Joseph Musakali from Moi University, I think, as you've heard. Please use the Q&A section. My colleagues Malavika and Jody are working very hard to collate your questions. So anytime you have a question, when a speaker is presenting, add it in the Q&A box in the webinar toolbar, you'll see it there, and we will pick it up later. May I now take this moment to welcome and thank our speakers for graciously accepting to share their knowledge with us and for making time. And in the interest of time, because we are trying to make sure that we get out of the session as much as possible, I will only mention their names, their affiliations, and the topic of focus today. But as I do that, their bios and introductions will be displayed in the chat. And I think Malavika or Ruby is doing that. I must also acknowledge that we have tech support from our Zoom tech support is being provided through OASPA by Events Tech Hub. So you will see Lachlan will be somewhere in the background. If you have any questions, if you have any technical issues, you can talk to them. Our presenters in no order, mentioning their names. So we have Bastien Miraucourt. Sorry if I don't mention your name right. You can tell they're all from different regions. So he is the managing editor, CNRS. He's talking to us from France, and we'll be talking about findings and experiences about publishing open access books in Africa. Thank you, Bastien. Then we have Dr. Judith Fathallah. Sorry, Judith, I keep trying to mention that name. Department of Organization, Work and Technology from Lancaster University, and also a committed member in COPIM from the United Kingdom. And she will be talking about some successful open access books funding models. Then joining us from South Africa, Andrew Joseph, digital publisher from Wits University Press. He will talk to us about integrating digital outputs and open access in the business development of an academic book publisher in Africa. And lastly, but not least, Jill Claassen, also from South Africa, section manager for scholarly communication and research at University of Cape Town Libraries. She will talk to us about early results of an African institutional publisher's global transition to open access. So all these topics we will hear from our speakers, and we will use these conversations later for our discussion. So pay attention. Again, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to ask Bastien now to go ahead and make his presentation. Welcome, Bastien.
Thank you very much, Marie. Thank you very much, all. I hope I will share my presentation very quickly. So I think it's this one. Do you see something good?
Yes, we do, Bastien. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
so thank you very much. So as Marie mentioned, I'm from CNRS, but I should disclose that is my own data and observation. So it's just involved myself and not my institution. So to wrap it up briefly, so I'm in charge of, roughly said, the publishing production of the French Research Institute in Sub-Saharan Africa. There are several institutes which publish journals and books. So here we are about books. So there is a long publishing activities. I'm not creating that from scratch. Going back from the 1950s in Ethiopia, there had been journals published. In the 90s in Kenya and Sudan, and in the 1990s in Nigeria and South Africa. But the main thing is in the 2020s, there has been a shift toward open access for books and journals. And in the 2020s, a reorganization and harmonization of these publishing activities. So now we are publishing 3 journals, and we are developing 2 book imprints, CFE for French Center for Ethiopian Studies and Africae, all in open access on their proper website hosted by Open Edition Books, which is a French platform. So at the same time, we want to continue co-publishing with partners in Africa and Europe. These are some of the partners in Africa and Europe. And yes, the general fields of what we are publishing is African studies, which means trying to understand African culture and society from the social science and humanities. So I am working from France for African Studies and French Research Institute located in Africa, but mainly our context of funding is from France and Europe. So what is the context? So this is some text retrieving from the Coalition S, which is interesting. It's very simple. There are principles and there are recommendations. Principles are mainly worded for articles and for journals, and it's worded as a must. You must publish in open access journals or open access platform when it comes to articles and journals. When it comes for books, it's a recommendation. It's an order of the should. You should publish. So you see, it's a little weaker for now. So there are open access book policies in some countries, but mainly from funders, not for national open access book policies. And I think open access national book publicity doesn't exist yet. At the contrary, there are open access national policies for journals in Europe and other parts in the world, and also in Africa. As you may know, Ethiopia has an open access national policy for journals, but nothing for books. So that's the context. However, if there is a should generally on a national level, there is a must for specific funding. So we are funding our books development for now, Africa and CFA, through a grant from a national fund for open science. And it is self-explanatory. It makes open access mandatory for books that are funded through this program. So that's why our action now is to publish open access books whenever it's not mandatory on a national level, but mandatory for funding programs. So that's the context. And the question is, why all this money to fund books in open access? Why all this money for government, for research institutions, for research agency, and so on? As you may know, because open access means many more readers and many more citations, even for books. That are some examples specifically from books that you can increase dramatically your citation for books, which is very good when you're part of a board of a university, and I'm not part of the board of a university. So my main concern is I can reach more readers with my open access books. And very specifically, it has been documented way more readers in the South, in the global South, mainly saying Africa, Latin America, and Southern Asia, as this graph shows. It has been published in 21. And I can add my own stats from Open Edition. As I said, we are hosted by Open Edition. So it's really, really clear. This is the website of IFRA Nigeria, where we're publishing Nigeria-related book collections. And you see, I think it's quite clear that the readers are from Nigeria for the most part. So we reached a Nigerian readership, even if we are published from France and open access books in Nigeria. This is Africa I was talking about. We publish about, for now, mostly Eastern and Southern Africa. And you see that the readership is mostly from this part. And IRD editions, it's development studies in French, contrary to the others websites which are mostly in English. And in French, we reach Francophone Africa and also Southern America because there are collections in Spanish. So it's quite clear, it's quite documented that as soon as you publish in open access, you can reach actual readership, digital readers from the country you are dealing from. But there is another fact that is more striking that we discover when we dig on the stats, that not only you reach African or South American readership that you wouldn't reach without open access, but African and Southern American readership read more digital contents proportionally than European or North American readership. It's counterintuitive, but the stats are there. I show you from the open edition book catalog that, for example, on the topic of Africa, it's just 3% in the catalog, but on the most viewed book, it's 14%. And if you narrow down to English written books, it's almost half, and French written books, it's the same. And the most viewed book, for example, on literature in English is Oral Literature in Africa. In politics, it's a book about Nigeria, and so on. So even if there is a small part of the catalog, you see that the books are widely read and widely most read than other books. And the same thing, when you are publishers which publish on South-related topics, when you publish about Africa and Latin America, you have really big chance to have very good views and very good downloads. So that's an example that South-related publisher, so publisher who are published from the South or about topics on the South, mainly Latin America and Africa, are way more viewed than the other publisher. So I call it another representation of Africa and Latin America, just to put on the paradox that, in fact, there is an under-representation in terms of number of books in open access. So as I try to convince you, there is a significant practice of digital reading of academic contents in Africa, and yet there are very little content to read, by the way. I retrieved some stats from WorldCat that can show that there is a huge production on African subjects in the world in terms of books, like literally thousands of books. And we can see just a few hundreds of open access books published each year, like between, let's say, 3 or 4%, most likely. And what is more worrying for me, there is a lot of imbalances in these open access books landscape on African topics. First of all, a wide majority of the open access book publishers are from the North, and mostly not only in the North, like the global North, but mostly for 3 countries, by the way, mostly, which is the USA, United Kingdom, and Germany. And the only book publisher from Africa that publish in open access books yet are mostly South African publishers. And for some other books, some other year, I took 2022 as a year of reference. We can see some open access books from Codesria, but as I saw, no, they are not publishing in open access for years now. So the living open access in Africa is from South Africa. And when you see what are these publishers, you can see that there is mainly 2 types: private companies or university pref and non-profit organization. There's a slight majority from private companies, and the private companies that we know that it's the big ones like Routledge, Springer, Brill, De Gruyter, etc. Which means I say that now open access books is not for the beauty of sharing knowledge, but it's also a consistent business model to pursue. And from another side, I see it's a consistent business model because the book processing charges from a book asked from these publishers are mostly from $8,000 to $12,000 US.
Sorry,
So,
Bastien,
yes.
you can wrap up.
Yes, I come to the end. So there is a lot of imbalance for now. Imbalance of the languages, because English is the widely prominent language. Imbalances of the region of interest, because it's African, Anglophone African, which are mostly in terms of these topics. Imbalance of the authorship's profile, which are mostly Northern authors or African authors, but working from the North in English-speaking university, etc. I can develop later. So there is mainly a lack of diversity on open access book publisher, which leads logically to a lack of diversity on open access African topics dealt with in open access books. And we see on the left is the landscape of open access book publisher, and on the right, the landscape of open access journals on African publisher, and you see that it's strikingly different today. If I have 30 seconds, I will wrap it up. So I'm still quite optimistic in the fact that it's possible to have open access books from African stakeholders, because the technologies now can be implemented, since technologies for open access journals are now implemented. Technologies for open access books are not that different. In fact, they are quite twins. Dissemination platform exists and can be used for African stakeholders, and the fundings which are not reached now, there is no really fundamental reason not to reach these fundings, to put it like that. And there are a lot of funding, there are wide diversity of fundings for open access book research program grants, private foundation, crowdfunding models, community-led initiative, etc. And to go further, and it's just to open the discussion, that there are some action that can be think of to go to a fairer and more sustainable open access to books, join forces, forming a network, a consortium of publishers. That's why, for example, Latin American publishers did, European publishers did, and Southern European publishers did. Making aware of the existence of this landscape of book publishers in Africa that can be reachable for these fundings, and connecting and exchanging like we are doing now from publishers all around the world about these matters. And I have finished.
Yeah.
Sorry if I was a bit long.
Thank you for your presentation. And on that note, I will ask Judith Fathallah to talk about books funding models. Welcome, Judith.
Thank you. Can everybody see my screen from the beginning?
We can, Judith. You'll just need to put it into presentation mode. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so my name is Judith Fathallah, and I'm speaking to you today about some of the work of the Open Book Collective and our related collective development fund. This addresses the problem of high book processing charges and inequalities in OA publishing that Bastien alluded to actually in the last presentation. So what is the Open Book Collective? The Open Book Collective is a UK-based charity with an international membership. What we aim to do is raise revenue streams for open access publishers and service providers, by which I mean infrastructure providers such as those providing the metadata for open access book, in order to support a model of open access book publishing that doesn't rely on book processing charges, which of course are unaffordable and inaccessible to many researchers. We make it easier for librarians to subscribe to support open access membership schemes. And in this way, we build an OA community, a new community of publishers, service providers, and librarians internationally. As I mentioned, we are a charity, so we are non-profit by charter. We are built on open infrastructures and aim to support bibliodiversity. Again, Bastien alluded to the problem of, for example, the dominance of the English language in certain subjects and areas. We are hoping with this model to go some way towards ameliorating that. So how does it work? Well, it builds on and extends membership program funding models that some of you may be familiar with from other publishers and schemes, such as OAPEN, Direct to Open, Punctum Books, and Open Book Publishers, wherein libraries are able to sign up to support packages of relevant publishers and service providers to their institutions. These, you can see on the screen here, are some of our publisher members. You may recognize African Minds, for example. That's an African member, and we have publishers from around the world. And here you can see the logos of some of our service provider members, including DOAB, TOTE, an open metadata provider, and OAPEN, which you will recognize there. So what are we offering to publishers and service providers? We are offering an easy workflow. Many of these publishers are very small. They may not have the capacity or the ability to offer a membership scheme that is attractive to libraries on their own. We undertake outreach on their behalf to our global community of potential supporters. Again, we reduce their reliance on book processing charges. And one of the criteria for becoming a publisher member is to be moving away from using BPCs up to a certain percentage at a different time. And we build these sustainable infrastructures. These membership schemes are more reliable and allow for more financial planning than things like one-off grants, although I am going to talk about grant funding in the second part of this presentation. What do we offer to libraries then and to institutions? Well, libraries are often confronted with quite a confusing array of open book initiatives that they may wish to support. So we act as an aggregator and a discovery portal through which they can find quick and consistent information about initiatives that are relevant to their institution. They can be assured that the publishers that they are supporting through us meet high standards for things like peer review, governance, business models. And you can read all our membership criteria online if you want to Google it, so you can see that that scrutiny has been done. And again, we make it easy. This is one procurement process, easy integration with third-party payment arrangers, such as in the UK, we use JISC. So in addition to this model, our aims and objectives are to support publishers, infrastructure providers, and other organizations to increase the quality, quantity, and diversity of open access books. We have another way of achieving this, which I'll describe now in the second part of this presentation, which is called the Collective Development Fund. This is a charitable grant-giving scheme, and the initial first two rounds were funded from our funders directly, and also a small percentage of the membership fees that libraries and publishers pay to us is extracted to create this fund. And this is what it's for. It's to support the publication of scholarly OA books. It's to creation and support the infrastructure for distribution, cataloging and preservation, to establish networks and advocacy, and for other projects building scholarly OA capacity. And this is important because I have to say that it's not for book processing charges specifically. It's about building capacity. And we ring fence a certain percentage of this fund specifically for lower and middle income countries. And we have been successful in allocating that in our first round this year. So the fund has closed for 2024. You can see a screenshot there of the post for the guidance for this year just gone. As you can see, it's also available in Portuguese and Spanish. We do hope to offer it in more languages in the future. We will shortly be administrating the funds from round 1, and then round 2 will open in 2025. What we are looking for is projects that are moving towards or have already achieved high alignment with Open Book Collective values, which you can see outlined here. This means, as I say, a care for and curation to high quality OA books, a commitment to bibliodiversity, collaboration and research sharing, networks community, horizontal working relationships, and we have this phrase, scaling small. Scaling small is an alternative towards the idea of scaling up. It's an alternative to the idea of publishers or infrastructure providers expanding. It's to do with building resilience through collaboration and mutual support instead. And again, safeguarding and growing access to academic books for global readers. So that I think is very pertinent to this session particularly. It's open to applicants, everybody in the world, everywhere in the world. There are some limitations on what we can administrate due to UK sanctions being a charity, but I think that is very unlikely to come into to be a problem. It certainly hasn't been a problem in this round. You can be a new initiative or established. You can apply as a team or as an organization. Some of these grants are being held alone, some are being held with other funding, and the projects can be local, regional, national, or international, though again, as I say, that focus on bibliodiversity and equity is important there, so it's something to be considered. If you would like to follow us for updates on this process, we are winding down our use on Twitter due to issues with the platform, but we are still on there to an extent. You can follow us on Mastodon. That's probably a better alternative there, using @Open Book Collect. And you can also follow us on our PubPub site, where you can read in full the call for this year at openbookcollective.pubpub.org. You can also email me with any follow-up questions, Judith@openbookcollective.org. But as I say, do look out for our next funding round in 2025. So I think that covers our 2 alternatives that we're presenting to book processing charges in the hope of increasing equity and bibliodiversity in OA book models. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. You noticed that Bastien gave us a view of how the African OA publishing book environment is currently. Judith has mentioned some solutions and most importantly, things that would help us move our business models as publishers. We are going to hear from 2 African presses. They will talk about their experiences and how they are integrating open access book publishing. And to start us off, Andrew Joseph from Wits University Press, please, you can go ahead.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone, and good morning. I'm joining you from Johannesburg. Hope you're all well. I'm just struggling to get the presentation mode. Is that working now?
Yes, that's perfect.
Yes.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm Andrew Joseph. I'm the digital publisher at Wits University Press, and we're based in Johannesburg. We are an HSS publisher, Humanities and Social Sciences, books, and a journal. And we've been going for 102 years, which is very, very good, and hopefully we'll keep going for another 100. And I'm going to be talking to you about sort of infrastructure and the digital outputs that are necessary for the digital outputs in order to enable open access, and give you a sense of some of the things that we've done. I thought I'd start with just letting you know that there are many university presses and scholarly publishers in South Africa. These are the sort of university press publishers who are there. There are, as Bastien mentioned, commercial publishers, smaller and the larger multinationals who are based here as well. So there's quite a lot of activity. But I think that we see these presses, these 5 other presses, as our natural allies and our natural home to be with. A broad overview of this is that every publisher in South Africa, or certainly these 6, have made efforts to engage with open access in various ways. And some have been quite successful. UCT Press, you'll hear from Jill after I speak, is an fully open access publisher, as is the University of Johannesburg Press. And the rest of us have made little efforts, or smaller efforts, around this, some more structurally so, and some slightly more ad hoc. What we don't have, and I think these are the conversations that we've started having, which is very, very useful, is to begin to align these and coordinate our policies, but our activities as well. And that's been really good over the last few years. COVID had some benefits for us being able to meet more people than just being there in person. We do have an issue in South Africa with state and institutional mandates. So there are strong state-driven and institution-driven mandates to publish open access. However, the funding, the structural support, infrastructure that is necessary for that is not always forthcoming, and we very much have to individually make efforts to do this. A few ways in which people have attempted to engage with open access and to publish open access books is to begin using things like PKP, the Open Monograph Press, and OJS for the journals. Organizations like OAPEN have been incredibly helpful with facilitating a lot of the back end and a lot of the hosting of content, as well as the sort of measurement and usage statistics. For the most part, there is a fair amount of backlist flipping, though that is moving again, as I said, because with UCT Press and with UJ Press being fully open access, there are more born open access titles, which is a better way to approach this from both an open access principle idea, but also from a sort of production digital output kind of idea as well. And our usage measurement is complicated. We're generally relying on reporting back from the platforms like OAPEN or PKP. Some presses have their own sites, their own website. HSRC Press, for instance, has their releases their OA titles on their site itself. So it's a matter of kind of pulling together various bits of information around this. And even though there are initiatives, and I'm sure this will come up later with things like the Open Access Usage Dashboard, which attempts to collate all of this data, there are still challenges that each of these presses faces in there. So at Wits University Press, we are a fairly traditional mission-based press. We operate on a cost recovery model, so there is the necessity to generate revenue, hinting back to the institutional mandate, contrasting with the institutional support from that. But what we do realize is also the value of supply chain integration. So being able to sell in whatever form, in whatever format, either through print or digital, is necessary for us to be able to continue to enjoy the support from the institution. I think this is true for most of the presses in South Africa, where that return is included in that return is not only the idea of availability, but also the idea of revenue coming in. That's hopefully something that we're beginning to shift as well. So at Wits Press, as a policy, we have 10% of our front list is published born OA. We do operate in some instances on the book publishing charges, the BPC model, where researchers allocate funds from their projects to us. This is not sustainable, as we all know, but it is a necessity. It's a sort of unfortunate necessity in order to be able to do that, to be able to publish OA titles. We do participate in a number of programs. So I've just listed the two here, which is Knowledge Unlatched, which in its first iteration, which we were very active participants in, and then more recently in the JSTOR Path to Open project. We have, I might just skip on to the next slide, seeing that the time's moving along. We set about doing this and understanding that open access books are merely another component to the output that we put out. And what we didn't want to have was a gap between producing books that are going to be sold and books that are going to be OA, either in terms of quality or in terms of the product itself. So all of these aspects that I've listed here, that we have an XML-driven workflow. So we're not simply producing PDFs and making them available online or selling those online. The content is housed, is generated agnostically. We attach DOIs to each title and chapter. The use of PIDs, persistent identifiers such as ORCID and RAW and ISNI, is something that's quite important to us, simply because we want to have our content available, our books available for as long as possible past the sell-by date of a PDF and PDF usage. We've got direct relationships with aggregators, with major aggregators, and we are consistently, as I said, we do about 25 books a year, so about 2 books a year will be open access, and we ensure that those are available, listed, discoverable in all the ways as the other books that we sell, as all the other books that we sell are as well. We also do use ONYX, standardized metadata, which has integration across all of these availabilities and discoverabilities, which has really enhanced our ability to make the titles completely discoverable. And then lastly, we actively participate as much as we can with organizations who are interesting and pursuing interesting, actively interesting programs. So the Publishers Associations, the South African Academy of Science of South Africa, excuse me, Editor, who generates who are the standard holders for ONYX, and then obviously the larger persistent identifiers, ORCID and Crossref, etc. And the OA organizations, OASPA and OAPEN as well. So some of our challenges here, and I think regionally here, not only in South Africa, so of our immediate neighbors, is this lack of coordination and collaboration. As I said, there are conversations that are starting with that, but I think it would be very good for us to begin to pursue more active hold of those things. The transformative agreements, which perhaps we won't go into that in this discussion, but that has posed a problem simply to be included in the discussions there, and we've made many efforts and will continue to do so to have small publishers such as these 6 included in those discussions. South Africa is generating and producing 2 bills at the moment, the Open Science Bill, which and the Copyright Amendment Bill. There are issues with process more than with content, although there are content issues with these as well. But again, it's about the inclusion of these smaller voices who are an essential part of the academic capital and of the kind of cultural value that's being produced here. My concerns, I think, for the last 2 points are that if we don't include smaller voices and we're not actively consulted and participating ourselves, there's an onus on us to do that. That we're simply going to have very, very large voices and potentially not really hear the voices of locals. We've made major efforts to include local languages. And I think, again, these are things that are largely regional based. Possibly in the case of South Africa, it might even be a little more parochial than that. It might be within the country, but that's very important for us to pursue, and we're working on the commissioning end to ensure that that happens. And then the very strong focus in South Africa on STM publication at the neglect of the HSS. There's a lot of support for STM publication in South Africa, scientific, technical, medical publishing, as opposed to HSS. And yeah, we'd like to sort of just refocus that on the humanities and social sciences. A few possible solutions are
Andrew, you might want to run a bit faster.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Just a few suggestions. I think there was an issue, I think, around, there was mention of something like decolonization initiatives. I think that we see this as a fundamentally political project in order to begin to control and own the content and to ensure that there's attribution not only at the level of the author, but also nationally. I like the idea of the local regional consortia, and again, I think that would be something to really take forward in a southern-led initiative. I'll stop there, and thanks so much for listening. Thank you very much for inviting me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and that you have introduced the issue of Born Open, Born Digital. So I will invite Jill to talk about their experiences with results of an African institutional publisher who's globally transitioning to open access. Welcome, Jill.
Hi, Mary. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. So you'll note from the bio that I'm a librarian by trade. And I'm hoping after my presentation, you'll understand why the university's press is located within the libraries. So I have to give a bit of a history of UCT Press, given the fact that, given the topic. So UCT Press started at the University of Cape Town in South Africa in 1994 already, and it was managed by the university with a press board. But in 1998, they sold the press to a local company, Judith, and Judith bought the imprint. Yet in 2021, Judith decided to return the imprint back to the university as the commercial model of making a profit had failed. And the discussions between Judith and the university took 2 years because, of course, the model needed to change. And because the university has a Vision 2030, as well as an open access policy, the UCT Press Board decided to change the model of dissemination, and they moved UCT Press to become an open access publisher. So this shift emanated from the university's leadership, and in a communication from the then DVC of Research and Internationalization, Professor Sue Harrison, she indicated that one of the fundamental principles of UCT's Vision 2030 is social justice that enables the collective public intellectual to participate in and influence public debate through open and accessible knowledge dissemination. The university's open access policy is an important part of the social justice agenda. the policy means that our research should be as widely accessible as possible, removing significant barriers to access that exists in the traditional academic print publishing industry. And so besides the mode of dissemination, another change that the press underwent was its governance structure. I'd indicated that the press strategically is located within the university's DVC Research and Internationalization Office, and the role of this office is to not just advocate for the press, but also to solicit necessary funding from the university for effective functioning and sustainability of the press. So the university's press board comprises of academics who are elected by the University Senate Committee, and they take full responsibility for the academic processes associated with the press. And this includes internal review of all book proposals and to review whether it fits within the Department of Higher Education criteria of original research. I think Andrew specifically touched on it. And it really is the board's full responsibility to take charge of those academic components. And so the board operates more as an editorial board. And so the board decided that UCT Press should be operationally located within UCT libraries. And really it was because the libraries by that time had a thriving library open access service underpinned by social justice and publishing diamond open access journals, monographs, and textbooks. And further, the UCT developed a platform where African scholarship can be shared with no access barriers, so operating on diamond open access. So as mentioned, it was decided that the press would be an open access publisher in terms of its model. And UCT Press understands the challenges faced by African scholars when knowledge is commercialized and they have to pay to publish their research. And so the press decided that its primary model for UCT authors would be diamond open access, in that the authors would not pay anything toward the production of the book. And the cost of the book would be carried by the university. And given the fact that this BPC pool is quite finite, it would only cover production costs, and so additional costs like even indexing, printing, etc., that would need to be covered by the UCT author. At this point, it's important to note that in this transition period, non-UCT authors would need to source their own funding and pay the book processing charges. And you would have heard from Judith of the Open Book Collective. UCT Press decided to become a member of Open Book Collective to contribute to providing a sustainable publishing model. And so I've touched a bit on the publishing mandate, but I decided that I'm going to hone in on it through the terms of reference that is in the UCT Press board. And so the publishing mandate, who gets published? It's all researchers producing publishable academic work within UCT's Press's remit and through co-publishing agreements. What gets published? It is very specific. It's monographs and edited collections that meet the Department of Higher Education in South Africa's research output policy, and really it's to get the subsidy if the monographs meet the criteria, and it's a good subsidy of more than R1 million if it's a book, so R1 million I needed to add with original research. In terms of the publishing mode and format, While the press is in transition, there would be a hybrid option, and the press works with a service provider to offer a print on demand. Copyright specifically is focused on in terms of its mandate, where copyright remains with the author and Creative Commons license is recommended. And so UCT Press has a website, and while the press was putting all its governance structures and terms of reference of what the new UCT Press board would need to be doing, one of the things they did from 2022 onwards was to put some of its back titles, make it open access after there'd been communication with the authors. And currently there are 65 titles on the UCT Press website. And apologies. So one of the ways, of course, of noting how a title is doing is really on downloads, and you have to note that, and I'm going to remind this and say often, is that the business model of for-profit did not work. So these back titles, then having a print run of about 300, they stopped selling. And so when the books became open access, it's almost as if the mode and format of making it visible and discoverable through DOIs and ORCID IDs, it then got a new lease of life. And so the slide that you are looking at is I've just taken 4 random books and looking at how the downloads have spread globally, and you'll see again that there's a good representation on the African continent. This one is around multilingualism in the classroom. So of course it is local knowledge that is downloaded a lot, specifically in South Africa. I'll just go through this one here and then another one, and you can see it's the downloads are spread. It's not just in the global north, for example. It really is global. And so one of the, what had been decided by the DVC Research and Internationalization was that the press needed to be relaunched because, of course, the university and the society at large needed to know that it had become an African open access publisher. And what we had done was we interviewed some of the authors, and I thought it important to note their comments around how moving from the business model of making their work available in bookshops and now being freely available with no barriers. So of course you can read them, but I'm going to just take one of them and read the quote, and it's really the second one. I'm very pleased, no, the first one actually. I'm very pleased that since the availability of the book has open access, it's been downloaded many times. And I think it's really important to make available to a wider reading audience, particularly students. And the authors made mention of especially I think this third quote, which is important to note when a model, of course, is closed. It's the author says, as we know, bookshops don't keep books very long, and if they don't sell in mass, and they don't sell in masses. And so I suppose I've always been hoping, I've always wishing it could be freely available, that it could be making more of an impact.
Jill, you need to wrap up.
Am I? Oh no, that's all good. I think the part that I need to mention is that UCT Press has published 154 books over the last many years, and of those 154 books, in because the press had been trying to sell the back titles, 79 of those books had not sold one hard copy in the last 2 years. And so, of course, with every new press, every new mode of publishing, there are challenges. And I think the one challenge, the big challenge is mindset. So definitely the age-old barrier of needing printed copies of digital books. For book launches, there needs to be a print copy, and then of course, who pays? Even here in South Africa, the need to deposit or disseminate the book in print to the legal deposit libraries. Again, who pays? If they, there's a QR code, it can be freely downloaded, but who pays for that? And then the role of the library as publisher, I think it's difficult for even the academics to understand the role of the library and what the role we play in printing. So I'm just going to conclude, Mary, by talking about some of the future plans, and I'm so glad they touch on exactly what Andrew spoke about in effect, because we are an African open access publisher. Multilingualism is definitely, or multilingual languages is definitely a publishing avenue that the board is looking at. Again, the infrastructure, we use Open Monograph Press, and it's to integrate the open source XML format for greater discoverability, and then it's to add the catalog to other international directories. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. And that was very informative for a press that is really trying their very best to go open access. I think there is a lot of learnings there.